Hello, comrades and friends. I would like first to greet the two organizations that have put forth this initiative, POGO and CTP's Women Department, and of course the invitation and the opportunity to share the view of the Portuguese Communist Party on the matter. I have prepared a small statement so that everything is as clear as possible that I would now read. One cannot talk about inequalities between women and men without talking about social inequalities. And one cannot talk about social inequalities without talking about the impoverishing neoliberal policies. The gap between the richest and the poorest is widening in Europe, with a severe imbalance in the distribution of wealth. Today, the available income of the 20% most rich in the population is 6 times higher than the available income of the 20% poorer. The increasing risk of poverty is closely and directly linked to the destruction of significant social functions performed by the state, as seen, for example, in the destruction of public social security systems in a number of member states, along with cuts in the key social benefits, family allowances, unemployment benefit, sickness benefits, and minimum social integration incomes, which affect the entire population but have a particular impact on women, particularly those with dependent families. In Portugal, over the 4 past years, over 1 million children lost the family allowances. 3 million people are at risk of poverty. According to recent data, in December 2015, 123 million citizens in the EU28 area, about 25% of the population, were at risk of poverty or social exclusion. We know that women are particularly affected by the risk of poverty in the EU28 area. In 2014, 46.6% were at risk of poverty and social exclusion before social transfers, and 17.7% were at risk of poverty or social exclusions after social transfers. Nowadays, 38.9% of the population and 48.6% of single women in the EU28 are not in a position to cope with unexpected expenses. The same reality for single-parent families, especially families headed by single mothers, who account for 66.6% of single-parent households in the Union. Poverty has also a strong impact on children, and the effects can last an entire lifetime and continue across future generations. The educational gap between children from different socioeconomic backgrounds has increased in 11 countries. In 11 countries, the provision of early childhood education and care to children between the ages of 0 to 3 reaches no more than 15% of coverage. And this is directly linked to the policies in this area, reducing the public funding and working through privatization of education. The EU policies have promoted the privatization and destruction of the network of public services and infrastructure providing care for children, the elderly and the sick, and the supply of these high-quality and free public services is now reduced or non-existent. Women often take the responsibility for the care of elderly or ill family members, as well as for children. This reality sums to the fact that women are worst affected by unemployment and suffer negative discrimination in relation to access to jobs. This is especially true in the case of women who want to have children and women who are already mothers. Women are particularly vulnerable to precarious employment and wage discrimination. Poverty and widening inequalities have worsened with the macroeconomic policies implemented by the EU and the austerity measures imposed in response to the economic crisis. Labor deregulation policies and the attack on collective bargaining are fostering an extension in working time in a number of member states and enforcing the reduction of wage, which is contributing to increased working class poverty. In Portugal, the last increase in the minimum income from 505 to 530 euros has brought 25% of the working population to this level of income. 10 years ago, only 5% of the working population had the minimum wage, which means that although the minimum wage has increased, the rest scope of wages has remained unchanged. The minimum wage after inflation stands nowadays at the level of 1974. These policies are promoting and encouraging precarious employment and the downgrading of the value of work, which has a particular impact on young people and working women, who are obliged to accept jobs with increasingly precarious conditions, often without any social protection. The pension gap between men and women averages 40% and has its origins in wage discrimination and discrimination in access to employment, precarious employment, and low wages, which combined stand for an increasing obstacle to women's economic independence and is one of the reasons why women find themselves falling below the poverty line as they grow older. We know that living at risk of poverty results in social exclusion and limited access to primary healthcare services, education, decent housing, culture and public transport, as well as malnourishment and material deprivation. Women have been hit hardest by the crisis and the austerity measures imposed on a number of countries, which has increased their vulnerability both collectively and individually, exposing them to more serious exploitation and leading to poverty and marginalization, which has also helped to fuel trafficking in women and prostitution. There is an existing and increasing attempt to greenwash the neoliberal policies enforcing the so-called social pillar of the EU. This is being brought through the Europe 2020 strategy and the European semester, for instance. The Europe 2020 strategy, which is supposed to be aimed at making the EU a smart, sustainable and inclusive economy, is based on targets that are claimed to be ambitious, but are in fact meaningless, such as 75% employment rate, which means accepting that around 25% of the working population will be unemployed and unoccupied, and a reduction of at least 20 million in the number of people affected by or at risk of poverty and social exclusion by 2020, which means acknowledging that in this scenario 20% of the EU population will remain in this situation. In practice, the Europe 2020 strategy has meant unprecedented attacks on wages and social rights through direct wage cuts, labor deregulation, the spread of precarious employment, and an increase in retirement age, and the abolition of restrictions on the movement of labor in the EU, and has also meant an attack on public services and the destruction of the manufacturing base in the most weakened economies. The same is valid for the European semester, which imposes the economic governance policies to the member states and controls, at the site of sanctions, the budgetary policies of each state. This is why the struggle of the left, the struggle of women, men, the struggle of the unions and of the people must be focused in rejecting the austerity policies that have been imposed in the EU's economic governance policies, which have been a decisive factor in the exponential increase in poverty, particularly among women. Social inequalities and inequalities between men and women can be fought only through policies guaranteeing a better distribution of income based on an increase in real wages, actions to promote labor regulation and labor protection, in particular through collective bargaining and the regulation of working time, and guaranteed universal free access to high-quality public health care and education services. The EU is not working in honesty to fight inequalities. Take the maternity leave, for instance, an instrument that would have a great relevance in protecting women through maternity and would hence work as an instrument towards equality, which the Commission, after years of stalling, has withdrawn. Instead, as a priority on fighting inequalities, the Commission has set the discussion on the presence of women in company boards, which fully neglects the real causes of inequalities. Guaranteeing the existence of a public network of elderly care, public health service and of high-quality free child care services and facilities, as well as universal, free, public and high-quality education systems, are decisive to release the women of these duties responsibilities, making them fully available for the work market. I have just spoken too much now, sorry. I would just like to express, as a closure, the solidarity of the Portuguese Communist Party for the struggle of the Cypriot people in the fight for reunification. We are sure that the common struggles that are fought from the Greek and Turkish Cypriots will take a relevant role not only in the process of reunification but also in the firm defense of the sovereignty of Cyprus and the rights of its people to decide on their future. Thank you.